Tonight is a very, very special night. It's not often that you get to talk to an author of a book that literally changed the world. The book is this: Not in His Image, Gnostic Vision, Sacred Ecology, and the Future of Belief. The author's name is John Lamb Lash. He's with us tonight, and I'm very excited that he is. And I don't do this often. I'm just going to read from the back of the book because it serves as a great introduction. And up on the front, Roger Payne endorses the book and says, sometimes a book changes the world. Not in His Image is such a book. And I agree 100% with that. And Not in His Image describes the rich spiritual world of pre-Christian classical Europe, the pagan mysteries, the great goddess, Gnosis, the myths of Sophia and Gaia, and its future as a force for reconnecting to the earth. John Lamb Lash's riveting account describes the decisive arc of history from the dawn of the Christian era to the present moment of global terror, a trajectory driven by faith-based violence and fundamentalist politics. Countering the patriarchy of monotheistic religions with the Gnostic story of the wisdom goddess Sophia, Not in His Image gives us back our heritage and guides us beyond destructive social chaos towards a sacred ecological path for the future. John, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Well, I'm really grateful for this special occasion. You know, some people would say that I've written one of the top books on Christianity ever written. And whether or not that is true, I'm especially grateful this evening to be able to talk about Christianity and maybe to some Christians or those who have come through that belief system. And I want to say at the outset that I'm not here to attack anyone, but I am here to warn.
Not only was your message extremely timely when you wrote Not in His Image, but it perhaps even more timely today. And the message of the Gnostic vision, the message of the home story, the message of the fallen goddess story is arguably more important today than it was even when you wrote Not in His Image originally. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have to absolutely agree. Chelsea Green, my publisher, is bringing out the 15th anniversary edition this summer. And that required me to go back and do some revision in the book. So the new book has the same message, the same impact. There are some new features in it. And as I was revising it during 5 weeks from the end of the year through January, I was stunned at how much power and relevance it has coming forward to this moment, and even specifically to the great event, the great crime against humanity that is currently underway, and you all know what that is.
Now, John, would you say that it is an overstatement for me to say, and this is the way I feel, and feel free to correct me if you feel the need to, the creation of Christianity, as the more I look into it, may well have had as its primary target the great Sophiac myth and the great understanding of the home story. Is that overstated or is it accurate?
Not in the least. There is a vast amount of evidence to indicate what I have often said. The Gnostic message to humanity and the Sophia myth of our origins and our purpose is without question the most taboo, demonized, repressed, and attacked message that has ever come to the world. There's no question about that. The evidence is clear.
Absolutely. And John, for those of our audience that may not be familiar with the term, because it is somewhat of a scholarly term, could you explain what you mean when you say myth?
Right. There are two ways to look at myth, and they're both valid. One way is to equate it with a lie or a superstitious fantasy. So there are myths that are of that type. I used the myth in the in the version of a comparative mythologist. So that's basically what my tag is. So I have looked at almost all of the myths of all cultures in the world in all times, and I compare them. And as I do that, I take the professional view that these myths are not lies, but that they are in fact narratives in a mythopoetic form that describe things that actually happened. So if that is the case, and that is the line I follow, then you need to have the skill to be able to translate those mythic narratives consistent with their original purpose and meaning. All cultures have their myths. The Japanese have the myth of their origins, their people. Then, of course, there is the Judeo-Christian myth, which is the largest indoctrination program on the planet. And the Islamists have their myth and so forth. I use the term living myth. The Sophianic myth, which I recovered and restored in my book, to my knowledge, I'm the only scholar to have done so, is a living myth. And when the power of this myth reaches you in its beauty and sanity, you want to live this myth. And it differs from all other myths. For instance, look at the Bible, look at the main document of the Judeo-Christian myth. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has Genesis, the story of creation. And we'll take a really close look at that one. It has then the history of the Jewish people, then it has the New Testament, the story of Jesus, and then it has the apocalypse. And if you take a few steps back and look at it, it's done. It's a done deal. It's a myth that you take on by indoctrination, but it's not a myth that you can actually live through, explore, change, and evolve with. But that is the case with the Sophianic Gnostic myth. It's a living myth.
If I can, I'd like to turn over the reins to you right now and have you just walk us through the story of Not in His Image, the story of the most beautiful story in the world that's been replaced by one of the most horrific stories in the world. And I would just leave it to you to take us where you think we need to go, and I'll just reserve the right to interject every now and then if that works for you.
Lovely. It works beautifully. Let me just preface it by saying there's a meme in the Sophianic myth that goes like this. The most beautiful story on earth is the story about the earth.
Yes.
And I can assure you that every single person, and there are more of these people every day, who embrace this myth and own it, find that it comes to them in life every day in a vivid way. It comes in their psyche, in their soul. It comes in every little incident in nature. The myth reaches you once you recognize it, and it reaches you in a way that no other myth can reach you. So I want to emphasize again that it is a living myth. So maybe I should start to make people comfortable with a little bit about my personal background and how this all started. You see, I was born in New York City in December of 1945, which, by the way, scholars have determined is the first week of 1945 when I was born, is when the Nag Hammadi codices were discovered. And they are the basic sources. Yeah, that's a fact.
That's a very, very interesting fact, John. If we wanted to wax philosophical, we could draw a lot of comparisons and analogies and even some conclusions with that. And if nothing else, that is fascinating. And that's a great part and a great beginning to the story of John Lamb Lash.
Well, I have to say, I still get a bit of a thrill every time I register that fact. So I was born in New York City, but due to personal circumstances, my father had died before I was born. I ended up with my mother in an absolutely exquisite fishing village in Maine called Friendship. So I come from Friendship. I want you Christians to realize that. That's also a fact.
That's beautiful.
Okay? Yeah. And what happened was, in Friendship at that time, the Lashes, that's the name I adopted. My real name is John Lamb. That was my father's name. So when she remarried into the family in Friendship, I got the third name, okay? There was a cult, a denomination, to use the correct word, of what is called the Advent Christians. Now, they're not to be confused with the Seventh-day Adventists. If I remember correctly, the number of the denomination of Advent Christians at that time was about 30,000 in the entire United States. So we're talking about a fractional denomination. Now, they were very puritanical, very evangelical. The whole town was dominated by the local church. And so even though I was somewhat of a stranger and an intruder because I came with this redheaded Italian woman from Brooklyn, I was recruited and pressured enormously to be a Christian of that denomination. Now, what happened was so I started out as a good boy. And I went to Sunday school. I went to church. My parents, by the way, my stepfather and my mother, were really lukewarm about religion. But because of social pressure, their son had to be at Sunday school and so forth. You get the picture?
I do, absolutely.
So I would say from about the age of 8 to younger, from about the age of 6 to maybe 11, I was an ideal attendant. And one of the things I used to do, because they discovered that I had good elocution and I was smart, they would invite me up to the pulpit and I would read passages, and everyone would be very moved to hear me read, say, the opening passages of the Gospel of John. And I enjoyed it because of the sound of it, and I could read it very well. So for 5 or 6 years, I was the ideal recruit. And then things started to happen. Somehow, in a way I could not define, this whole program did not sit well in my soul. And from the age of 12 onward, that feeling became more and more intense. And I can remember one of the worst experiences of my life was in summer when we went to a Christian summer camp. I didn't want to go. I think I was 13, maybe 14. And there was a lake there. And guess what they did in the lake?
They baptized you. Yeah.
So they were pressuring me, not my parents, but the elders of the church, who were very zealous, okay, were pressuring me. And I thought, well, I'm just going to do this to get them off my back. And I'll never forget, I have a vivid memory of wearing dungarees and a white shirt and being taken into the lake by my uncle Paul, who was a member of the Lash clan. And he dipped me in the water. And I can tell you, when I came up out of that water, I was in a boiling rage.
Wow.
I was in a rage. I felt that I had been violated. I felt that it was as if I had been violated, sexually violated. I think that's
John, do you think that was more than just a psychological feeling? Do you think there was some sort of moral, spiritual, energetic violation perpetrated upon you?
Well, most definitely, looking back at it now, I would say
absolutely.
But you have to take on board that at the time, 12, 13, it was still about 2 years before I started to have the mental ability and I contacted the materials that started me putting together in my mind why I felt that way. And that had a lot to do with discovering Friedrich Nietzsche. The first book I read was The Birth of Tragedy. And then I read Thus Spake Zarathustra. That's where he famously says that God is dead. And here I found a young boy in this little town of 900 people in Maine. Here I found a voice from Europe. And I was always very attracted to Europe, by the way, by European philosophy. And I found a voice who was saying, it's all wrong and it's very, very bad. And so that was a complete intervention. And so I would say from that point on, 16, 17, I was on the warpath. And I determined that I was going to find out what was affecting me so badly about this program, this belief system, and its values, its moral values, and I was going to take it down. I can count forward from that breakthrough moment 60 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I've only been
So
about
I've been on
40,
this for
John, so I've
6
still
years.
got some time to catch up.
Well, I'm 75. What I mean is, from the time that I started to go for it, started to delve into what this was all about, what is Christianity all about, and what are these other people? You know, I never met those other people in Maine. There were none of those other people, that is to say, the authors of the Christian program, the authors of the Bible. There weren't any in Friendship, Maine, or anywhere. I didn't encounter any of them until later in life. It's a practice that I have as a comparative mythologist. You investigate the cultures of different people, like the Japanese or the Aztecs or the Greeks, and out of respect, I call them by the name they called themselves. So, for instance, the Greeks called themselves the Hellenes. So I prefer, when I talk about Greek mythology, to say the Hellenes, because it's a respect for what they called themselves. So I do the same for those people. I call them what they call themselves, which is the Yehudin. One of the first things I began to wonder about in those early years was, well, wait a minute. Who are these Yehudin? It seems to be some small tribe from the Middle East. And why am I following their belief system? And why does it say in the Bible, why does it show a portrait of a deity who appears to be, well, today I would say, a full-blown psychopath, jealous, angry, and then, fast forward to the New Testament, and wait a minute, the divine emissary of that jealous, off-planet Father God sends his son to us, and his message is supposed to be all about love. This doesn't hang together. So that's really one of the places where I started to get on to the notion that something was deeply wrong. I did many, many studies in my life. I got into the mysteries early. I got into Gnosticism, Hermeticism, Theosophy, Anthroposophy. In 1991, I brought out a book called The Seeker's Handbook, which is out of print now. But I went into, I think, 30 different things that I investigated: Zen, Buddhism, Sufi, Wicca. I've looked into all these things. And the advantage of all that is that it has built a very broad perspective for me to focus on this, I would call it an enigma, this dilemma. What is this Judeo-Christian thing about? You see? So I really
Absolutely.
cracked it. What I did in Not in His Image, it took a long time. I encountered the Nag Hammadi Library in English when it came out in 76, okay? And I couldn't make heads or tails of it. It was just a lot of gibberish. But then I started to really go deep in it. Eventually, I acquired the Scholars Edition in 5 volumes. I think it's about 25,000 pages, which has the Coptic language on the left side, the English translations. I went to the source material. It took a long time. It took a lot of work. And then I realized I had hit the treasure. So let's cut to the chase. What I realized when I finally got to the core of the Gnostic message, and I saw that in those Nag Hammadi writings, that there is something that many scholars ignore. So I thought, well, how come scholars aren't concentrating on these passages? The tendency of scholars who are brought up, indoctrinated into Judeo-Christianity, is to spin the Gnostic materials in that direction. So you often hear the term Gnostic Christianity, but that's a weird freak that they have invented. There is basically no Gnostic Christianity. The Gnostics were anti-Christian and anti-Judaic. So when I saw that, I really started to feel the ground under my feet getting really solid. And I decided that I would be the first scholar who is not indoctrinated in Judeo-Christianity to bring the Gnostic message to the world.
And John, not to interrupt, but so many today, especially within, this genre that we are in still try to insist on trying to make this Gnostic Christian ludicrosity something that is valid and real. And you said it so well. Gnosticism is anti-Christian, it's anti-Judaic, and the two cannot be merged. And you can tell the lie as often as you want, but it will never make it true.
That's right. And if you go on the internet and you look on Gnostic Christianity, look it up, why there's many new sects, and there are even denominations today of Gnostic Christianity. So I want to make it clear, here are two main points to really get to the heart of the matter. First, I, as a scholar, totally reject Gnostic Christianity. And secondly, and this answers the question of why does this happen? Why do people who encounter the Gnostic materials try to spin it again toward Judaism and toward Christianity? The answer lies in one single word: malware. There's a phrase that occurs in Not in This Image where I say, not everything that operates in the human psyche. I use the word psyche, but Christians would use the word soul. So I'm talking about your soul, which is your memory, your emotions, where your values are located, your inner life, the basis of how you express yourself outwardly as a human being. Not everything that operates in the human soul originates there. So when I discovered the core of the Gnostic message, I realized that they were warning us that there is malware in the human soul. Yeah.
Wow.
And I call this the salvationist program, the salvationist ideology. And so what I did essentially was I detected the malware thanks to the Gnostic materials. And then I went into it like someone who can write code and read code, and I decoded the malware. And then I went further and I showed how the malware works, how it got into our souls, and how to disable it and delete those corrupt files. That is the ultimate message of my book.
I'm pretty much in awe. I'm almost slack-jawed. It's amazing information, and this is such a timely message, and I'm very profoundly thankful that you're with us tonight. John, please continue.
Okay. There is a passage in Genesis, chapter 1, verse 27, which describes the myth or the sacred narrative of Judaism upon which Christianity is based. And so it is the creation myth, okay? And every Christian knows this passage, he, that is to say, Yahweh, the Supreme Father God, the actual Hebrew is Elion, the word that the authors themselves use for the Supreme God is Elion, okay? So the passage says, and I want to ask any Christians listening, if they've ever gone to the internet and looked at the English Hebrew interlinear, where you have the Hebrew and then you have the English, and read that verse 27, because you might think it says, and he created mankind or man. You find those words in countless translations. He created mankind or man in his own image, right?
Right.
It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that at all. It doesn't say that he created mankind, that is to say, the totality of the human races. This is at the core of the malware. It's a lie. It's a deceit. The correct translation is, he created them, Adam. He created Adam in his own image.
Ha-Adam, John, is what it says. You're absolutely right.
Ha-Adam. But Ha-Adam, according to the authors of that text, was intended to mean one thing, and what Christians read is something else. So there's a primary deceit in that text. Christians read that text, and they are intended to believe that it means that God created humanity. But that's not what it says. it says that God created Adam and the Elohim. In fact, if you look really closely, it says God created the Elohim, and the Elohim created Adam in their image. What are we talking about here? Well,
Wow.
Christians take it to mean that's humanity, that's our origin story. But the authors who wrote it meant something else. And what they meant and what they understand to this day is only known to insiders of the Talmudic circles. So the Talmudic scholars today read that passage in a completely different way. And I'm telling you how they read it and not how Christians presume to read it. So Christians are misled from the very first line that describes the creation of humanity. Give you another clue, and this is something that I discovered as I was breaking the code. The Judaic authors, and to this day, the Chabad Lubavitch and the Talmudic scholars adhere to what I'm telling you now. This is insider knowledge. To this day, you would look very hard to find in the Bible the word for humanity that they use. The word for humanity that they use is enoshut. Enoshut. But you don't find that word in Genesis, and you don't find it anywhere else in the Bible. Scholars typically translate Adam as, our parent, our male parent, and Eve, Heva, as our female parent. And Christians deceptively and in an evil way that refers to them. It does not. It refers to the authors of the narrative, not to them, not to the Gentiles. So when we say Gentiles, or when you hear the word Goyim, that is all the peoples, all the races of humanity, except the Yehudin, who are the authors of that narrative. Now, if you can get that, and you can get over that, you're on the road to some profoundly transformative truth. You see, the Gentiles and the Goyim, or the Enoshut, which is a Talmudic name, not for all of humanity. Listen closely. The name for themselves is Yehudin. The name for the rest of humanity, all the other races, is Enoshut. I'd venture to say, and anyone can write me at my school, Nemeta, that there may not be a Christian out there in the world who knows that distinction. Or if they are extremely rare. So to go back to that passage again, and remember the analogy, because I think it really works. Everyone who can't write code knows what code looks like. We all look at it and we're just dumbfounded, right?
Absolutely.
This is what I was looking at. I was looking at the equivalent of this code, and I was detecting the malware or deceit in the code. So another way that you can translate that passage is Elyon created the Elohim, who are the archons indicated by the Gnostics, and the Elohim archons created the human image of themselves.
Ooh.
So today, in the deep insider Talmudic view, which I have to admit, there's probably a fair number of the Yehudin who themselves don't know what I'm talking about right now.
Oh, absolutely. I would concur.
In that insider view, the Yehudin, who are the authors of the narrative, the myth, they are the human representation or creation of the Elohim, and you and I are not. Now, if you want to fast forward from Genesis to the modern day, and you come into the end of the 20th and the 21st century, some really, really shocking things have come to be known through the internet. And so how do they view us? Well, they view us as Goyim, animals. We are like a herd species inferior to them, which they have created because they were created by the Elohim, who created them as a special class, a special species. And there's no end to the number of prominent Yehudin who have made this statement out in the open.
John, that is absolutely profound, that distinction that you just brought out. The fact that not only do they consider us a subspecies, but they actually consider us their creation. That's just mind-boggling.
It's outrageous, isn't it?
If you call yourself a Judeo-Christian, you've got to go all the way back to the core of what it is. And the core of what it is what you're saying. And there's no way that you can be part of this and think that you're going to be anything other than at the very best, a second-class citizen. I just don't get how smart people can't see this.
Yeah. Fast forward to 2020, 2021, a species to be experimented upon.
Oh, wow. Did you just say a mouthful right there?
Indeed. And when I was rewriting on his image in January, again, I repeat, I was shocked and stunned by the relevance of what I have written to what is currently happening. I call it the crime against humanity, but I always add in progress. It's not a crime completed yet. In fact, we have a tremendous opportunity in our time to detect and expose the crime as it is being committed, as opposed to, say, detectives who will go on a crime scene where the crime was committed days or months or years before, and they have to put it together. No, we can and must put together this genocidal program under the cover of a pandemic to take it down while it is in progress. And that is a tremendous opportunity, and there is no better intel that supports that opportunity than the Gnostic message.
And we certainly can tell from the information that you're bringing up that this is definitely a plandemic.
Most certainly it is. And the origins of the plandemic go back to this root, this ideology of salvationism, of the Messiah and the apocalypse. Those are the three parts: the creation of humanity, their narrative, salvation of humanity, and the apocalypse, the end game. Those are the beginning, middle, and end of their narrative. It's a myth. And we are facing the end game of their narrative. And at this point, it gives me an opportunity to, again, point to how relevant this is. Consider the word transhumanism. Now, there are some folks in the world today who are waking up to the very horrible fact that transhumanism is something genuinely evil. The idea of replacing humanity or mutating humanity genetically, which these vaccines, which are not vaccines, openly state that they are doing. The Moderna manufacturers say it's an operating system. You are injecting into your body an alien operating program. You are accepting into your body. So this is transhumanism. So I think,
John, it's almost like you're accepting in malware.
That's right. Malware that has been materialized in a genetic formula. And so let's agree that there's an emergent knowledge every day. It's building hugely that transhumanism is evil, and there is something very, very evil behind it. So if you go back and you ask the question, well, what is the origin of transhumanism? I mean, we're here, we're humanity, all these races living on this planet. We're living on this glorious environment of nature. We're sealed into this beautiful envelope of the atmosphere where we have everything for us. And where did this alien element come from? Because transhumanism is an alien intrusion. It's not human. If you ask that question and hold on to that question, I can assure you that the root of the ideology of Judeo-Christianity and the root of transhumanism are the same. It's the same program. And the root of that, the key word, the key algorithm in the malware is one single word in Hebrew. That word is Zadik. Z-A-D-D-I-K. And I talk a lot about not in his image, about Zadik. What does Zadik mean? It means the righteous, holier than thou. It even means that. It means much holier than thou. It means the ultra righteous. Now, there's a second word, which is a derivative of Zadik, which is Zadikim. And Zadikim is the name. You can look it up. I'm talking history of religion. I'm not making this up. It's the name for a sect among the ancient Hebrews. And this sect had as its founding figure an entity called Melchizedek.
Oh, yes.
So what Genesis describes is the foundation of the sect of the Zadikim, the ultra-righteous. At that moment, when Abraham, by the way, take note, was in the grove of Mamre, which is a plateau near Jerusalem. And at that time, it was a wooded plateau. Now it's desert. And he was there with his small tribe. And he was leaning against a tree. And he sort of fell into a stupor, half asleep. And in that stupor, an entity approached him. Three, actually. The main entity and two others. And the main entity was Melchizedek. And Melchizedek imparted to Abraham the identity and the mission of his people. And those among the ancient Hebrews who adhered to this scenario built their ideology from that moment. So the cult of the Zadikim, or the cult of the righteous, is the origin of Christianity. Christianity did not become something different with the New Testament. It just became a further iteration of the malware.